Good morning from California, and thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Wisdom of the Soul class. Is this 27, I think? And happy to be here. Got my coffee. Hope you're ready to go. And today we're going to pick up where we left off last week. Just a little bit of additional material. And if you weren't here, or if you haven't yet seen the video on YouTube or heard the podcast, we were talking about mystical traditions through history, from shamanism through Egyptian Hermetic philosophy, how that led to Judaism and Jewish mysticism in particular, and how Christianity and Christian mysticism came out of that, and how Islam and Sufism came out of that, the relationship of Sufism in particular, and, well, I would say Christian mysticism to some degree, to neoplatonism is something I don't think we touched on, so I'll go back and pick up on that. And then we talked about the Eastern religions, and which are mystical and which are not, like Buddhism and Taoism are really not considered mystical, but Hinduism certainly has a branch. It's like Protestantism, you know. The Protestants have, I was going to say dozens, but it's literally thousands of different types of Christianity. I Googled it once. How many dominations, how many dominions, what's the word for it? Non-denominational. How many why is the word demon in denomination? There's a new one. It came up 43,000 types of Christianity. 43,000. So many are non-denominational, and as it should be, I think. Why not? But you got your Baptists and your Methodists and your Lutherans and Presbyterians and Pentecostals, and let's not forget the Catholics who really put all of this together 1,700 years ago. Protestants are still reading a Bible put together by Catholic bishops in the 4th century AD. So we were distinguishing this chronology of mysticism and how it stands apart from organized religion. And I want to pick up on that a little bit today and talk about American Transcendentalism and the New Thought movement. Then I want to define some terms, as I suggested in the newsletter. Words and phrases and idioms are important because they introduce concepts. So we're not going to just define words, we're going to talk about the concepts behind them. And then what that opens up for you is an opportunity to explore your own beliefs and expand your own understanding, and have some really wonderful conversations with people you know, your friends and maybe family members who have done their reading and who are interested as well. And we'll give you some sources and authors and really seminal books that you can read to broaden your base. Remember, I'll speak for myself, we're not looking for, I said I'd speak for myself and I used the editorial we. I'm suggesting it's best not to look for the one right way, but to harvest what makes sense to you from all these different traditions, all these, and what is the primary difference between organized religion and mysticism, or Buddhist philosophy or Taoist philosophy? It's basically a solo endeavor. Mysticism and Buddhism and Taoism are about the experience of following love to its ultimate source and understanding who you are as that consciousness that is often referred to as love. But remember, we're not talking about an emotion. Even straight-laced, ordinary, just out of school psychologist will tell you love is not an emotion. In fact, love brings up all kinds of emotions, right? From tender and affectionate, and we would say loving, an affinity. There's brotherly love, philos. And there's romantic love, erotic love, many different attempts to label all the different kinds of love, but it's basically a drive in psychology, not an emotion. Happiness is an emotion, but there's basically only 4 emotions, if you remember our teaching from a few weeks ago. Happiness, sadness, anger, and fear. Sometimes they say 6. They'll add surprise and disgust, right? That would be 6. But happiness, sadness, anger, and fear. And you have the optional surprise and disgust. Surprise, arguably, is fear. And anything that hurts is rooted in fear. That's the big lesson. So, emotional management is an essential part of spiritual growth. That's why most people have such a difficult time with spiritual growth, because they haven't learned to manage their emotions. And if you're doing that, if you've learned to do that and you're working on managing emotions, then you've already begun to move away, in most cases, from organized religion, from dogma and scripture and ceremony, harvesting what makes sense, gathering up what resonates for you as true from all the various traditions, organized religions and such, but moving into a solo effort. That's really, it's my experience that informs me, not some guy who is standing up there interpreting for me the richness of all of these spiritual traditions. And again, why go to Baskin-Robbins and always get vanilla? Seems to me you could benefit from being adventurous and exploring all the other flavors and all the other options available to you. And so, of course, we'll be described as wicked and evil and satanic by the Christians who, for whatever reason, tend to be much more exclusive than the other religions. Most of the other religions are pretty mellow about what you study and what you believe, and they're pretty inclusive, generally speaking, even though tightly organized and devotional, and yet there's a lot of exclusivity, especially in fundamentalist religion, one right way, and if you disagree, you're very bad. Very, very bad. And we'll save a discussion of the Inquisition for later. Lopping off heads and burning people at the stake because God loves you. So let's do our opening meditation. What do you say? And then we'll get into class today. Let me, I think we're all set. Yeah, let me just suggest that you get comfortable in your chair or wherever you happen to be seated. And close your eyes when you're ready. And begin by just becoming aware of your presence in your body. What does that mean? It means turn your attention as you close your eyes away from the physical world and the events and conditions that surround you, to an awareness of living inside this physical body. And most of us dwell in our heads because that's where we appear to think. And that's where our eyes and ears, our nose and taste buds are all really close to the brain, you see. So we tend to live up there, but move your awareness simply by forming the intention down into your body and look around a little bit with your awareness. See how you feel. Just how comfortable are you? And is there any discomfort in your body? And though it may sound odd for me to suggest, I will nevertheless suggest that whatever you feel, whether it's comfort or discomfort, welcome it in. Give up any pushing away. Release any resistance to being right here, right now. And let those feelings you've been resisting and avoiding and pushing away come upon you. And if they are uncomfortable, they will immediately begin to diminish. Because the pain and discomfort we may feel physically and emotionally is for the most part born of our resistance to feeling it. Now, what if that was true? I'm suggesting it is true. So at least consider it. What if I let go of any physical pain? What if I let go of any emotional discomfort and allow it to have its way with me, to come upon me fully? That discomfort begins to diminish. Because by letting go, you let it go. See? Take 2 or 3 nice, slow, deep breaths. And as you exhale, create and sense a letting go feeling. Pulling in strength and power as you inhale, hold for just a beat as you peak, and as you exhale through the nose or the mouth. Feel that letting go as if you're deflating, like letting the air out of the balloon. And after 3 or even 4 nice, slow, deep breaths, allow your breathing to return to normal. And moving your awareness to the bottom of your nose, maybe the tip of your nose, maybe just between the nostrils, maybe just inside the rim of your nostrils. Watch your body breathing itself. As if you're devoted for just the next few minutes. We're not going to do 15 or 20 minutes, though you could, and enjoy the wonderful benefits of identifying as the awareness that watches, not the breather, not the body breathing, but the one who watches your body breathing itself. Simply identify the in-breath and the out-breath. This is an in-breath. This is an out-breath. I almost said in-breath as opposed to the exhalation, but it's part of a circle, a cycle. So feel the flow, less a back and forth than a coming around. The in-breath in, the natural exhalation out, coming back around. It's like when you ride a bike and your legs go up and down, but your feet go around and around. And so too with your breathing. Initially it appears back and forth. But even now, we're beginning to feel the cycle around and around. But you're not the breather. You could be. You could, at any time, take a big, slow, deep breath. No problem. You could hold your breath. You could pant. Do a breath of fire. But right now, you're allowing your body to breathe itself. And you're just watching. This helps us create a level of non-attachment. It's not detachment, really, because you're still aware. You're not oblivious. So we call it non-attachment. You're not only aware of your body breathing itself so easily, so elegantly, so gracefully, so effortlessly. As you become aware of yourself as awareness itself. And last week, we did 2 minutes of silence. This week, let's make it 3 minutes. Until you hear my voice again. Simply watch your body breathing itself. Know that your mind will be distracted from time to time. That's okay. As soon as you're aware of it, just let it go. With a little smile, say to yourself silently, of course, and without any admonishment of self, gently bring your awareness back to simply watching your body breathe itself from this gentle, fixed point of view until you hear my voice again. 3 minutes. And if you can watch your breath for 3 minutes, you could do it for 10 or 12 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. And if you can watch your breath as the witness, as the observer rather than the breather, you can in time learn to watch your thoughts, not be the thinker. You can begin to discern between a purposeful, applied thought, to read, to write, to solve a problem or make a decision, and the chatter, the monkey mind, the frenzy that goes on when your thoughts are not applied to a particular task. You're not those thoughts. The mind has its own agenda to keep you safe. So it's filled with fear and self-loathing. And all this time we thought that those were our thoughts. Know the difference between the frenzy, the chaos, the monkey mind of task, unrelated thinking, and the task-related thoughts that are purposeful and deliberate and meaningful. Learn to discern the distinction, to study and develop the mind. Watch your breath as the watcher, not the breather, so that you can become more skilled at watching your thoughts and your emotional feelings as the witness. Watch the rise and the fall of the conditions around you. Witness the rise and fall of conditions within you. But rather than feel as if you are the victim or the target or the effect of that rising and falling, be the witness. Life happens. It doesn't happen to you. It just happens. Sometimes you're aware of it. Often you're unaware of life happening. And in the middle, there's a great deal of variation around how aware you are of life happening. But it's not happening to you unless you take it personally and invest in the idea that you're a target or a helpless victim or an effect of a life that's done to you. It's merely happening. It's not happening to you. If you watch the sun set slowly, and enjoy that experience. Did the sunset happen to you? The sun would have set whether you were aware of it or not. It obviously didn't happen to you. Imagine yourself in the stadium, football game, basketball game, baseball game. It's exciting. You get involved. Did the game happen to you? Or did it just happen and you were a spectator in the stands? Very involved, but still the watcher. Oh, but if someone says something hurtful, something mean or cruel, or unintentionally triggers you in some way, well, then we say it happened to me. They were talking directly to me. It happened to me. Really? Is it possible that it just happened and you're aware of it? And you made it what it is? With your perception, your perspective, your attitude, and of course your response, which is often reflexive and not chosen. Even though they pointed their finger directly at you when they said that hurtful thing, even then, did it happen to you? Or did it just happen? And you gave it the power to hurt you or upset you, disturb you, or remind you of an old heartache, unresolved, never healed. A false assumption you made long ago and forgot about. Maybe that's what's going on. Life doesn't happen to you. Good things and bad things, again, simply a judgment. If it rains on your picnic, if it rains on your parade, it's not a bad rain. Or a good rain. It just rained. Don't you see all happiness and all sadness dwells in your mind? And all your life you've heard life is what you make it. And we smile and we nod as if we know what that means. Life is what you make it. We could suspend the judgment of right or wrong, good and bad, with us or against us, in our favor, opposing us, winners and losers, this or that, either or. All differences are opposites. Oh my God. All differences are opposites, really? Where in the world do we get these ideas? Dismiss them now. Things don't happen to us, they just happen. The meaning is in what we make of it. What do we make of it? Could we react unconsciously? Of course. Could we be more aware and more conscious of how we view and how we respond to these things that just happen? Well, of course. Life happens, and it can be trusted. Trust life. Trust yourself. Trust yourself. That you're better at learning to trust others. To what extent, to what degree is up to you. Trust yourself to begin to see how trustworthy life is. And bring this with you back into the room and count yourself out slowly, 1 to 3. In your own time, 1 is forming the intention. 2, feel yourself sort of floating upward as if waking in the morning. And 3, eyes open, wide awake, back in the room. Back in the room, wide awake, eyes open, feeling better, much better, feeling better than before. Eyes open, wide awake. Good. That's a nice lesson. Something I've been pondering this last couple of weeks. Life happens to me, really. We're so judgmental. There's, a lot of literature written, a great deal of admonitions available about not judging. But what's that mean, not to judge? I always think of the traffic light. You roll into, you approach an intersection where there's a traffic light and it's green, and then suddenly it turns yellow-orange. And you have to judge. Do I step on the brake or do I roll through the intersection? You've got to judge. Judging is for traffic lights. You vote. You go to the polls. Well, these candidates, you've got to judge. You've got to make a decision. It's like so many things in philosophy. Absolutes are difficult to come by. It's often a matter of degree. It's subjective. It's variable. It's relative rather than absolute. Just like desire. We'll be talking in the future about the platitudes in Buddhist philosophy about desire. But of course, the conundrum is if you desire to cease desiring, you've just transferred your desire nature to I desire not to desire. We always want something, don't we? But we could be the person that observes ourselves wanting rather than the wanter, you see, or the one who desires. What's that desire? How come it's never fulfilled? How come every time we get something we desire, that desire nature is fulfilled for a short time, you get a little dopamine hit, and you feel pretty good about yourself, but pretty quickly, that desire nature goes searching for fulfillment somewhere else. Never enough. Never enough. We do that in relationships. Unless and until we're married. But even then, many people continue to shop around. Wonder if I could do better. I've actually had clients say that to me. Nobody I'm going to identify, obviously, but I've actually had a few clients say, well, the problem with my marriage is I think I could have done better. They're shopping. The idea of changing themselves, like, that's something I had to introduce to them. Did you ever consider changing yourself than the whole world? There's a crazy idea. I love the old Eastern allegory, platitude, story, koan, not sure what to call it, story about to avoid injuring your feet on sticks and stones, you could cover the whole world with leather. It's just simpler to wear sandals. Or like the little Dutch boy trying to hold the dike, plug the dike with her finger to hold back the world. It just doesn't seem to occur to us that we could change the way we look at the world and the way we respond to it and stop taking everything so damn personally. Oh, it was done to me. They're angry, so they must be angry. Notice how directional anger is of all the emotions. They're angry at me. Don't use that at me with a lot of them. They're loving at me. They're kind to me. Notice how we separate ourselves. It's because of the appearance that we're separate and the world is separate. Not true. Let's pick up where we left off last week, talking about the chronology of the mystical traditions in the world and the philosophies that dovetail with them, like Buddhism and Taoism. Often practiced as religion, but not religious. A philosophy that could be seen as spiritual, because it deals with the invisible and the unseen. It deals with consciousness and awareness. But it's not about worship. There's no worship per se in Buddhism. There are these figures, these millions of Buddhas, these fully realized beings in most Buddhist traditions that populate the universe. You can aspire to be that. It's not exactly the same as a Godhead, Father Spirit, much less a personal Savior like Christ. So we touched on shamanism all around the world, pretty much a consensus that the physical world is animated by an invisible spirit. Thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands. There are graves that have been dated to 150,000 years ago that have flowers on them. 150,000 years ago, there was a reverence for life and a thought that we went to some sort of heavenly paradise afterward. Flowers on the grave. So that predates religion and the prophets. And that's what shamanism is, and folk medicine. And then we talked about Hermetic philosophy and the ancient Egyptians and the alchemists and the sun worshippers. This is where monotheism is born. Moses coming out of Egypt and understanding Hermetic philosophy and the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus. And then Moses, well, he has his own tablets of stone that he brings down off Mount Sinai. The law, he's a lawgiver. Writes at least 5 books of what we call the Old Testament. A canon, by the way, that wasn't really settled upon until like 200 or 300 AD. 200 or 300 years after Christ. The Hebrew Bible, or the so-called Old Testament, is still being canonized, still figuring out what do we put in, what do we leave out. And that's about the time that Christians started putting their Bible together, so-called Catholics. Catholic meaning one, meaning unified, meaning whole. But it was put to, it was done by an emperor who, Constantine, he wanted to, he wanted to create a nation state. He wanted to build an army around religion. And so for hundreds of years, all through the Dark Ages, that's what we have. We have the church state. And the church was the state, and the church ran the show. And we see efforts to do that in the Middle East, the jihadists, the Taliban, the extreme right wing of Islam. And we see that in America with the extreme right fundamentalist Christians who want to replace democracy with a theocracy. They want to take us back to that religious state. Well, that's what the Dark Ages were. It wasn't until the 10th, 11th century that universities were created and people began to learn to read and write. That used to be a career. If you were a scribe, if you could write, if you could read and write, that was your career because nobody else could until, a couple hundred years ago, really, just 100 years ago. Public education, people didn't. There are people alive today in America, born and raised in the USA, can't read or write. Didn't need to, just don't need to. Get out of school, never write another word, never do another thing. Not to mention the Renaissance and how the birth of culture and artwork and music and thought and the scientific method, the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, just explodes. And along with that, the discovery of some of this old Jewish mysticism, and that's where we get the interest in the Kabbalah, and the Tree of Life, and Tarot, and the Zohar, and all of these Jewish mystical traditions. And we talked about Christianity and its mystical tradition and Rosicrucianism, and then we touched on all the Eastern religions and philosophy, not all of them, but the main ones. And you weren't here last week, go to the YouTube channel, Ageless Wisdom Mystery School, and you can see that whole thing. I left out Neoplatonism last week, and I want to touch on that. Particularly the writings of a fellow named Plotinus and his book, The Enneads. And a lot of Sufism pulls on Neoplatonism, and I'm not sure Plato would recognize his philosophy in Neoplatonism. But what we begin to see is a mystical tradition, a coming together of people who recognize a universal spirit, an overarching consensus about a single universe, not just a single God that is personified as an old guy on a cloud, which is really idolatry. I hate to step on anybody's toes, but the idea of God as a man is a graven image. Remember that Heraclitus quote, or Heraclitus, that we brought up a few weeks ago. I think it's pretty provocative. If horses had gods, he said a couple of thousand years ago, if horses had gods, surely they would look like horses. So that we're in the image of God doesn't mean we create God in our image. That's a very fundamental mistake, and that's the problem of separation. If we look around, we say, well, I'm separate, spend my whole life trying to find love, didn't know I had it within me, not really sure that I am made out of this love, that I am this conscious awareness. So I'm looking out here in the world for love because everything is separated, and my body is separated, and you're separated, and here, let me reach out. Just holding hands is quite elegant. A hug is supreme. Just because we want connection. You hug a tree, that works. Why? Because you and the tree are part of one huge magnetic field, and everything else is part of one electromagnetic field. We have radio now and TV broadcast invisible. Oh, I know it comes on the cable too, but still broadcast off the mountaintop, radio and TV invisibly through the ethers. That ought to help with this idea that there's an energy, a spirit, an awareness, a consciousness. And this is where Neoplatonism in the West begins to touch on this mystical idea of monism as opposed to monotheism. And I'll come back to this in just a minute. I want to pick up on the American Transcendentalists, which I didn't get to last week, because their contributions are so rich. Uniquely American Transcendentalism includes great writers like William James. I strongly recommend at some point you read The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, first published in 1902. It'll wake you up. It's an incredible book. You got to take it in bite-sized pieces. It's some pithy stuff. He was a medical doctor, Harvard educated, is interested in physiology, his psychology, and philosophy. And he was looking for these threads and talked at length about consciousness and awareness as an energy, a spirit. William James. And his philosophy is called neutral monism. Once you become familiar with monism, there's several different kinds, and I'm not going to get into it. Let's just talk about the mainstream monism, so-called neutral monism, if you want to Google this stuff. As were the other transcendentalists, like, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and his student, Henry David Thoreau. And my favorite Emerson Thoreau story, by the way, is Thoreau goes to prison in Massachusetts for refusing to pay his war tax. So they just threw him into pokey, right? Don't pay your war tax? Are you kidding? And so Emerson, his mentor, his teacher, comes to visit Thoreau in jail, and he says, half jokingly, Henry, what are you doing in there? And Thoreau looked up at him and said, better question is, what are you doing out there? In other words, why are you paying your war tax? I learned from you to be a pacifist and a nature lover and to see all things as one. You should be in here with me. So they were transcendentalists. Walt Whitman's poetry, Leaves of Grass, Sing the Body Electric. Sing the Body Electric. Oh my God, do you get it? These are American transcendentalists. And what do you suppose conservative religious people said about these guys? Right? And why they burned their books. Beware the book burners, purveyors of fear. Religious people who claim to preach a gospel of love, but are in fact purveyors of fear and hellfire and wickedness and damnation. Scare the bejesus out of you. A little weird. Now, I want to talk about some terms, particularly at the top, monism and monotheism, and the concepts behind them. And then I want to touch on pantheism and panentheism. Those are two different words. There's an EN in panentheism. Pantheism, panentheism. It's very important that you understand this. And in about 5 or 10 minutes, we'll go to your questions and your comments. And if you just want to put in the chat box to Melinda, I have a comment, I have a question, or state it in a sentence or two if you wish, but rather than raise your hand, I think it's easier if you just put a note in the chat box. We're looking for comments and questions, a little conversation. That's why I don't pre-record all these. That's why I want you guys to be here live, so we can have some exchange, some interaction. So monotheism, as I've mentioned in past classes and even earlier today, monotheism, mono means one. Theism, theology, is a reference to religion. So it means one God. The problem that continues even today is that idea of one God, the monotheistic idea that is prevalent in all three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is that it puts the Creator as a being, as a limited, all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere equally present, and yet visualized as a separate being. How could God be separate, outside its creation, very far away, petitionable only through prayer, and then only if you did it well, if the idea of divinity is everywhere equally present? It's a contradiction. It's like the contradiction of why does the devil run hell if it's a place where God punishes you. The devil apparently works for God, because it seems to me if the devil was running hell, it would be a festival of depravity. So does the devil work for God? They never, these contradictions are rarely, if ever, addressed. Usually it's enough to get you excommunicated, thrown out of the church into the streets for asking these common sense questions. That's the basic problem with monotheism, the idea that religion is supposed to present us with the importance of being ethical and virtuous and kind and loving is noble. That's the best part of religion, even if it's somewhat dogmatic and rigid, inflexible, ceremonial, oriented toward ritual, very narrow in what's right and what's wrong. The idea that it is supposed to represent virtue and ethics and morality, that's the best thing we can say about it. Story it tells of us being sinners, born in the image of the divine, and yet somehow something about a snake and an apple, and Eve disobeyed, and she and her boyfriend got run out of Eden. That's all a story of incarnation, of souls incarnating into the world. That doesn't make us bad or evil or needing salvation. Something needs salvation, but maybe it's not the soul. Maybe what needs salvation is our animal nature, the physical body, our lust, our craven nature, our animal nature, that the ego, the so-called personality, the multiple roles that we play. I would agree that needs redemption, refinement, salvation, resurrection, ascension, moving on up like the Jeffersons. But the idea that the soul is bad and that the soul only indwells, this is another very significant, listen carefully, this is very, very important. distinction between religion and mysticism, this idea of the indwelling soul. And the church puts itself, organized religion, between the human being and their indwelling soul and the ultimate creative source, the Godhead, the creator, first cause, prime mover, whatever, Godhead. The absolute, that's what a philosopher would say. Church puts itself where your soul should be. Man, soul, God, right? God, soul, man, from the top down. Church pulls the soul out, sticks itself in there and says, oh, the soul is stained from original sin and it's inside you. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it overshadows. And one of the reasons that Emerson is important in American Transcendentalism to mysticism, like William James, is they were talking about an oversoul. This is a radical concept that had been forgotten about, even though the early church fathers, Google Origen, before Constantine got all the Catholic bishops together and created this church, there were church fathers, there were these scholars that studied Christianity. There was no Bible to study. There was a bunch of letters and epistles and some writings that came 100 years after Christ that they began to assemble. But many of them, like Origen, believed in the preexistence of the soul, that we are incarnated and reincarnated. And the church, one of the first things it did in the Council of Nicaea was banish that teaching of the preexistence of the soul to conform to this idea that you're bad. You're just bad. And you're going to spend eternity in hell if you don't get your butt over to church every Sunday and, put some money in the basket. I don't know. There's so much personal stuff I have around this. It's challenging for me to leave my personal frustration and irritation and anger behind, because I felt abused after I grew up and went to school. I felt that my religious experience was truly abusive. So I have my own issues around that. So read The Oversoul by Emerson and just ponder. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm telling you, you have choices. And one of them is to consider that the soul stands between absolute spirit or energy and the physical material world, your body and the physical dense universe. And we touched on this. Actually, we spent several of our very first classes going over the nature of the Trinity. Not just the Christian Trinity, but the Trinity in all religions. It's basically cause, meaning, and effect, or stimulus, perception, and response. It's spirit, consciousness, and matter. That's the primary one you want to work with. It's Einstein. Energy equals mass. They're the same thing. Everything material, everything solid is really just energy. Well, spirit created matter. I mean, the spiritual idea of everything that's physical actually being, of spirit is a religious idea as well as a scientific idea. They don't disagree at all. But the importance of breaking dualism into a non-dual model requires a middle element, that soul in the middle. The intersection of spirit and matter is consciousness. That's the soul. The soul represents consciousness. That's the Christos. That's the Buddha nature. Between your source and who you are as an effect of all of this. That's the secret is in the center. The mystery is always in the middle. Monism recognizes, unlike monotheism, not a separated God living outside of its creation, not a being, but a unified universe, a single energy swirling, spinning, currents, eddies, tides of energy, magnetic energy on multiple frequencies, sound, light. Everything is a frequency. Everything is a vibration. That's what energy does. That's what spirit does. As a peak and a trough, and a yin and a yang, and an ebb and a flow, and days and nights, and seasons and years, and to everything there is a season, right? Turn, turn, turn. It starts with the whole idea of spirit vibrating up and down, round and round, like your breath, the in-breath and the out-breath. You see? That's what energy does. That's what spirit does. So monism, neutral monism and its variations, is this idea that we're immersed in the universal ocean of energy, and that in places it condenses into material form. And that becomes very impressive. And you carry the food you've eaten as a physical body. And you bought this furniture, and you drive a car, and you live on an Earth planet, and there's a moon, and asteroids, and comets, and meteors, and interstellar gases, and stars, and other planets around the stars, and galaxies. My God, I'm old enough. When I was a kid, we thought every star in the sky was the universe. We didn't know that this was just our galaxy in my lifetime. Somebody looked in a big telescope and said, wait a minute, there's other galaxies. That was a mind blower. And now we know galaxies come in clusters. So there's galaxies, there's clusters of galaxies, there's these fibrous strands of galaxy clusters that create superclusters of galaxies, and it goes on to a point where it's just unfathomable, also unpronounceable. Hence, beyond our ability to comprehend how vast the universe is. But then you're reminded, well, the universe is expanding, and the rate at which it's expanding is accelerating, and now your face melts, right? Pretty cool stuff. Do not be confused by those who say science and spirituality conflict. It is not true. To my mind, anyway. Why would I choose between physical science and metaphysical science and quantum science, between physics and metaphysics? It's all part of one thing. It's for us to identify as the awareness, the insight, and the understanding that makes sense of it in a practical way and informs the way we treat each other, the way we organize our lives, and the way we behave. Monism, monotheism, two very different things. And then let me touch on pantheism. Fundamentalist Christians will spit that word out of their mouths, pantheism. Pantheism, to most religious people, especially in the West, is the same as paganism. It's basically the idea that God is nature, that divinity is in all things, as scandalous as that may sound, that the rock is sacred, the mountain is sacred, the bottom of the ocean is sacred, the fish are sacred, the clouds are sacred, the river is sacred. How could anything exist that is not part of the one thing? Who are we to be separating all of this stuff based merely on appearance? So the scientist looks a little more closely and says, there's only about 100 elements, a little over 100 different elements, that's the best word for it, out of which all things are made. Starting with hydrogen and helium, that's where the universe started. And then it began to cool and coalesce, and stars popped out, and all of the material in the periodic table is made out of the stars compressing hydrogen into helium, into other gases, and finally metals and minerals and chemical compounds, and everything that we have, everything that we own was born in a star someplace that exploded. And the earth is part of that, and not only the trees that grow from that, and the wood and the bookshelf and the paper and the books, and the material from which our computers and microphones are made, and the cars in which we drive come from that earth, and the bodies that we walk around in are made out of that same stuff. Is it such a stretch to believe that that which is alive, so-called organic, is animated and illumined by an energy? Is that hard to, is that really a big stretch? And then Einstein put the equal sign between. Not that that's the end of it. We're still learning about a lot of what we thought were Einstein's mistakes turned out to be true. And then other areas where we thought Einstein was true, we need to modify a little bit. That says, this stuff's over 100 years old. That's as it should be.
Michael Hanif has an interesting question.
I want to give me just one more minute. I want 2 more minutes. I want to finish this pantheism, panentheism, and then we'll go to the questions. I'm anxious to hear what you guys think about all of this. So pantheism is God equals nature. God is in you and me, and the sinner and the saint alike, and in the eagle and the snake and the snail and the slug and the most disgusting creatures, which are really quite beautiful if you step back and look at them carefully. There's nothing ugly of nature. It's all beautiful. That drives religious people crazy, pantheism. Panentheism, on the other hand, panentheism is very different. Panentheism is pantheism plus the opposite or the complement, which is everything is in the one life. So pantheism is the one life, God is in everything. Panentheism says, yes, that and the opposite. Everything is in God. Whoa, that's a big leap. That means the universe is the body of God. But there could be other universes too, which would still be part of the body of God. So beyond spirit, God's will, there's God's love, and then God's body. And the lower correspondence is our mental, emotional, and physical nature. Ever notice a Catholic, and if you talk to Catholics about this will blow their mind, I'm sure. Ask them, why do they touch their forehead when they say in the name of the Father, and their heart in the name of the Son, and their shoulders in the name of the Mother, the Holy Spirit? Father, Son, Mother, Holy Spirit. Because it corresponds to God's will. The mental nature in man is the lower correspondence. God's love, the magnetism that unites energy and matter, the consciousness aspect is in the heart. That's our emotional nature in terms of a lower correspondence. And the physical universe, the material universe, the shoulders being the physical body. So our mental, emotional, and physical nature is a lower correspondence of divine will, divine love, and its expression, divine intelligence in the physical world. Go back to the first couple of classes, 1, 2, and 3, for more on that. So panentheism is pantheism and the inverse, or the reverse, or the complementary idea. And I'll just leave you with one more related to that, and then we'll go to the questions. Transcendent and immanent. Imminent, spelled with 2 I's, means about to happen, pending. It's imminent. Any minute now, it's imminent. There is a word, it's in the big dictionaries, but it's missing from many dictionaries, immanent, which is I-M-A. Immanent means innate or inherent or within. So when we talk about immanent and transcendent in all the various mystical fields, it's a reference to everything in the one and the one in everything. That's probably the easiest, most basic way to talk about panentheism. That every seemingly separated object is part of one thing, and that one thing also is in every little bit, right? Right down to the housefly that you decided to release instead of kill, because it's part of the one life, you see. It'll die eventually. They don't live very long, but you don't have to kill them. You don't have to be the one that kills them. We'll talk about this stuff more in the future. It's a huge field, brings up all kinds of questions about even eating meat and such. Stuff we need to take a look at. So everything in the one in everything, that's worth writing down. It's worth pondering. It's worth reflecting on. What if both of those things are true? And remember, high anxiety people are binary thinkers. They would say, well, only one of those can be true because they're different and seemingly opposite. So only one can be true and the other has to be false. There's a great truth in paradox. Confucius said all truth is found in paradox. And the more you ponder it, the less paradoxical it becomes. Everything in the one, capital O1, everything is part of the one. And that one is in everything and ought to be available to us as the wisdom of the soul. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Mindy.
Yeah, we're ready for Hanif.
Hanif? Michael, thank you very much for today's session. You covered a lot of interesting concepts, both in the meditation and then also in the class session. And actually, I never thought about this until you started talking today. And the question really is, or actually more of a comment, is that, the monoistic religions believe that God has been omnipresent and is always omnipresent. So really the comment is, why would God wait to send a prophet down that after humans had existed for probably thousands of years before that?
That's what you want me to answer or speak to?
Or speak to, or it's a comment. I don't know if it generates more discussion or more confusion. I'm not necessarily sure on that. But what's your take on that?
That the Christos, the consciousness, the exceedingly high level of awareness that Christ self-realized by a boy of 12, if not before. He's lecturing the rabbis when he's 12 years old and saying, don't you guys get this? Don't you see what I see? I'm not sure the best way to describe his presence on earth 2,000 years ago is as a messenger of the Godhead, God the Most High, the divine, the absolute. I wouldn't say the absolute sent him here. I would say as Christ said, have I not, he got frustrated. In fact, he said it so often and people didn't get it. Have I not told you, you're all children of the Most High, that these things I do, you can do and more? The Christos is in everybody. The love, the peace, the wisdom is available. It's in every single one of us. It's in every breath you take. It's in every cell in your body. You just need to remove the scales from your eyes. You need to breathe, relax, meditate, and turn within to escape the illusions of the physical world, this kaleidoscopic nightmare of frenzy around you. Look within. Christ said, when the eye becomes single, the body is filled with light. That's meditation and prayer. It's not petitioning Santa Claus to do things for you and give you gifts. It's turning within to find that Christos, that path or that way, that road, that via. I am the way and the light. Find that within you and follow that to the enlightenment, to the self-realization. So I don't think Christ was sent. I think he is one of many people on this planet, so-called prophets, that for whatever reason were born realized. Now, if you look at reincarnation, you can see how this is possible. It also gets a little mind-boggling when you realize that Earth is just one of a billion planets in our galaxy, and there are literally hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars, each with scores of planets spinning around them. You know, did God send a prophet to each one of those planets wherever there's sentient life? I don't know. We can argue that and debate that. But the distinction I'm trying to make, and thank you for giving me the opportunity, is that maybe he wasn't sent as a messenger of God. If you look at what he says, it's follow me, you know, be like me, imitate me. When somebody slaps you, turn the other cheek. I mean, it's all right there in the Beatitudes, the blessings from the Sermon on the Mount. Become like little children. The meek shall inherit the earth. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemy. In the hypocrisy of people who call themselves religious or Christian or any other religion, and then promote war. It's one thing to be violent accidentally, you know, swat a mosquito and then regret it, or say something hurtful to somebody you love and then feel horrible about it but not sure what to do. It's another thing to be absolutely devoted to hatred and violence as some sort of crusader, jihadist, Christian Taliban, or, you know, the ultra-conservative in any religion. Violent ultra-conservative Jews and violent ultra-conservative Muslims. We certainly are aware of that in the United States. There's war. There's Buddhists have fought wars. You might say, well, they weren't real Buddhists, but who's to judge? You know, for all the peace and love that's about. History is full of Buddhists fighting war, Hindus fighting wars, Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists fighting each other in the streets with sticks and clubs. And what is this devotion but the inevitable result of believing that we're separate and there's somebody here that is other than? That's one of the most crucial mistakes that we can make. So That would be my response. Find the Christos in you. It's an energy, it's a spirit, it's a light. I'm the way and the light. Follow that way, follow that light. Find the Christ in you, the Buddha nature in you, and follow that wherever it leads, toward the light, toward enlightenment, toward awareness. It'll change the way you behave, and it'll change the way life behaves. And if you think life happens to you, or whether it just happens, as I said in the meditation, the quality of that will change as you begin to realize it's a reflection of your consciousness. So that's my best 5 minutes on that. Okay?
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Hanif. Who else, Mindy?
Well, nobody right this second. Go ahead and let me know. I just wanted to dovetail off of Hanif's question, and it struck me a little more historically, which is a whole separate discussion. But that I think the time was right for a prophet to be recognized for various reasons. But when we go back, I think there probably were prophets all along, but they were lost to history. Certainly they go way back. So I think his question was really quite riveting. And when you really say why then, I'm not sure really it was then. Now Christ is really recognized. But I think there was some history that and some politics and the schism in the Jewish faith, of course, that played into that. And we just have lost so much to history. It would be fascinating if we could just jump back to ancient Egypt and I think that the drive in people has always been to find a prophet. But maybe somebody else has something to add to that. Seek that religious answer or spiritual answer, I should say.
Yeah, and the mystic would say that prophet is within you, that the guru is within, the teacher is within, and that's my feeling, even though I hold myself out as a teacher. Before I'm a teacher, I'm a student. I'm a student who teaches with the understanding that he or she who teaches learns twice. I've always liked that idea, that one of the big reasons I teach is so that I can understand. It requires me to consider further these ideas. If I'm going to do a class on Sunday, I've got to organize myself and think this stuff through and find the right language. There's a challenge, finding the right language for it. So we listen to teachers and we read scripture and we study philosophy books, and we should search out spiritual literature from deliberately diverse and antagonistic sources and compare and contrast. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's what feels right. It's what.
I have a comment. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to let you know there is one waiting.
Fine. Who is that?
Jim.
Hey, Michael.
Aloha, Jim.
How's it? I was waiting for everybody else to try and get in because I have a radio background too, and I don't like dead air. So several things, right? So I get a lot of this stuff from you, a lot of what's echoing in my head. Also, Alan Watts has been very influential to me. And he said in a lecture that, and this is how this non-duality thing, once he said, you know what's more comfortable than a comfortable shoe? A shoe that you know is comfortable. And so it's like, I was able to interpret that as, sure, I exist. I know that I exist. I'm self-aware, but I am also a part of everything that I said. So my self-awareness does not, it's not mutually exclusive with being a part of everything. So that's kind of speaking to the non-duality that you're talking about. He also mentioned, he said, well, actually, it was my idea about original sin, the tree of knowledge. What is that knowledge? That you exist separate from something else. right? And I know that's not the classical interpretation of the tree of knowledge, but it makes some sense to me of where we, where this anxiety comes from in the world, right? That we exist separate from something else. So there's more, but I don't want to talk over everybody.
Well, it's an interesting question. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is the way I would say it. The knowledge of the presence and the absence of enlightenment. Again, if Adam and Eve is a story of souls that have been given the opportunity to incarnate. Do you want to go down there? You want to live in form in a physical body. Do you want that knowledge and that experience of fear and suffering? Because you're not going to get that in paradise. What are the benefits of that? Well, the benefits to the one life, arguably, the one God, the Godhead, of manifesting its souls, its many souls into physical form, so-called incarnation, is it gets to understand its many qualities through the diversity of good and evil, of yin and yang, of the ebb and flow of things. We are locked in this physical world in a battle between good and evil. But we tend to project that out into the world. Who out there is good and who out there is evil? The problem is that there's good and evil in everything and everyone. And it doesn't serve us to categorize this group as the good guys because they're wearing white hats, and these people are the bad guys because we don't understand them. They're wearing the black hats. They're a different religion. They eat funny food and they dance in ways I've never seen before, and they have a different God, seemingly, and on and on and on.
My biblical knowledge is not much more than Sunday school stuff when I was a kid. And so growing up with that as pretty much the extent of it, the lion lying with the lamb, everything was at peace. Everybody was cool with everybody. And then all of a sudden, this apple gets eaten, and all of a sudden there's shame. All of a sudden I exist separate from that lamb and that tree.
Exactly.
Right? So again, the tree of knowledge, what is the knowledge that I exist separate from everything else?
Suffering. It's about suffering. The first noble truth in Buddhism, ye shall know suffering. Christ on the cross, suffering. It's all about
one degree of separation is what, again, going back to Alan Watts, that one degree of separation that you mentioned earlier in this, is where a lot of that anxiety comes from, a lot of that suffering comes from, rather than in East, God is everything. In the West, God made everything. There's one degree of separation that is quite stressful for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're a little kid and your dog dies, suffering. Or the hamster, or the goldfish even. And then grandma and grandpa die, and then your parents die, and then your friends start dying. Life is, and then they get, not to even mention, without even mentioning sickness and injury. And in Buddhism, Siddhartha, as I'm sure you know, Jim, there's a great story about him encountering sickness, aging, and death. Those are the first three sufferings. There are said to be others in Buddhist philosophy beyond sickness, aging, and death. And that it doesn't mean just your death, but again, your dogs and cats and your grandparents and your parents and your friends. And, being out of work, flunking out of school, having your home foreclosed upon, living without a home, being homeless, alcoholism and drug abuse. There's so much fear in this world. that the struggle to redeem that fear is central to self-realization, attaining enlightenment, nirvana, going to heaven, whatever you want to call it. But perhaps it is in this way that the one knows its many qualities, that it's having a unique experience through each one of us. We have DNA evidence and fingerprint proof that, like snowflakes, every one of us is unique. That means we're essential to some grand strategy to experience my life through Jim, who is not Hanif, who is not Michael, who is not Melinda, who is not the kitty over here, or the horse over there, or the willow tree, or the coconut and the mango. It's just God is not a man on a cloud, but an energy that is awareness itself, wanting to be aware from all these different perspectives and points of view. Nobody's ever lived the life you're living, Jimmy. Nobody ever has or ever will. And even if reincarnation is valid and true, your next life will not be this one either.
I'm rolling straight sevens right now, so I'm having a great life right now.
Well,
one other thing, and then I'll get out of there and let somebody else talk. You talked about a heretic earlier in this. I highly recommend the This American Life podcast called The Heretic. What happens when a very influential charismatic Christian is told in some sort of seat, in some sort of, during prayer session, that there's no such thing as hell? It's an entire hour long of This American Life about what happened to this guy. So I recommend it highly.
Well, we know hell is real because we're all in it.
No, not me.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. Tell me you never had a dog die.
Oh yeah.
And break your heart, or a girlfriend that broke up with you. Maybe not you, but because you're such a dandy.
Aren't I? Well, I used to be. All right, I'm going to let somebody else talk, Michael. It's always good to talk to you.
Thank you, brother. We're pretty much out of time. Mindy, anything outstanding we need to?
All I can think of is I want what he's having. That famous line.
It's living in Hawaii is what that's about.
Okay, then.
Yeah. Okay, people, thank you so much, and peace and blessings and love to you. Check out michaelbenner.com. Send your friends to michaelbenner.com. Drop a podcast review on Apple or Podchaser podcasts. A YouTube review is nice if you would subscribe, like, and comment. All the searches are Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. Ageless Wisdom Mystery School for the YouTube channel and the podcasts. And the private work. If you want to schedule a free intake session and consider private work, michaelbenner.com. Thank you so much. I'd like you to all unmute and say your goodbyes to each other, and aloha, salam, and namaste. Thank you for being here.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. See you next week.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Melinda.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.